In this video, we will be learning how to create a search bar in Swift. To do this, we will need to follow 6 main steps. The first is to create a struct on what to work off of for the context, and they must be equatable and identifiable and call those protocols. Then we need to create an array that calls the struct. Then we need to use the @state provided by Apple to track what the user is searching for. Then we need to use a filtered array struct that does 2 main things. The first guards if the search is empty and should still show us the context. The second is return an array of filtered context when a search is being completed. Then we need to display all this in a UI in the body. And then finally we need to call the search modifier, and then we should be able to have a search. So with those steps gone over, let's begin by creating the struct that we will call the context from. This struct will be conformable to the protocols of equatable and identifiable. We use equatable because we want to compare the context, and identifiable because we want to make sure that each context is separate from each other. So then if we type just above content view struct stands for structure, then capital contact, then colon, then equatable, comma, identifiable, then we put in the closure, and we will type in the following: let id equal uuid parentheses. uuid allows the struct to conform to identifiable, and uuid stands for unique user ID. Then we will create a name and an email string, and then that will be it for identifiable. However, whilst we've made it identifiable, this does not make it equatable. We will need to add a static func to make Swift's life easier and easier for us down the road. So static let func, and then because we want to make it equatable, we need 2 equal signs. Then in the brackets we do left hand side contact, right hand side contact, and this func will want to return a boolean, whether being true or false. Then to make sure that the boolean returns, we do left hand side dot id is exactly equal to right hand side id. So with that, we have made the struct both equatable and identifiable. Now we can move on to creating the contact array within the content view. So if we go into the content view and we type in let contacts lowercase equal and then square brackets, because we will be doing an array and square brackets represent an array, then we call the context struct, and we can see that we need to type in name and email. So what we'll do is we'll create 3 default people, one with the name of Alan, one with the name of Bob, and one with the name of Charlie. They will have emails of their names respectively, but Alan and Bob will have @gmail, whereas Charlie will have @email. This will allow us to decipher whether the search for email actually works or not. So with that, we have now created the variable or the constant to loop through the array. Next, we need to set up the @state provided by Apple to track what the user is searching. So to do this, we simply do @state private var search term, and then we will leave it as an empty string for now. And with that, just 1 line of code, we have set up the @state variable. Next, we need to set up the filtered context to make sure that we can filter through the context when the user is searching. guarding for if the search is currently empty, and then showing the users or the contacts when searching. So we will create a computated property var filtered contacts will conform to an array of contact struct, and then equals, and then squiggly brackets. Then, as mentioned, we need to guard to see if there is any search or not. So we will do guard exclamation mark search term is empty, and as always with a guard we need to have an else return, which essentially returns if this is not true. This guard basically means that if nothing is typed into the search bar, we still have the context showing on the screen. So now we need to actually return the contact. So if we type in return contacts.filter squiggly brackets, then within the closure we will bring a contact in. Then within the contact in we will want to get the name and email, because that is what we will be searching through. So contact.name.localized case insensitive contains, and within that we will have the search term. The localized case insensitive contains basically means that regardless of whether you search in uppercase or lowercase, we will be able to search regardless and it will show results. Then because we want to search the name and the email, we will have an OR operator, which is those two straight lines, and then we just do the same for email. So with that we've guarded to see if there's no search, and then we've also made sure that the search terms exist. Now we just need to put it in our UI and display on the app. This will be done through a navigation stack, and within the navigation stack we will have a list that has the parameters of filtered contacts and a parameter of search coming in. So we go down to content view, we type in navigation stack, then within the navigation stack we will create a list, then the parameter will be filtered contacts, then the protocol for the lists will have a search coming in, then we will create a HStack to actually lay out our name and email that we want to search for. So we do HStack text, and in the comments or the brackets we will do search dot name. We will give it a font of headline to make it really stand out. Then we will do text and search dot email. We will then do the modifier for font and subheadline. And as you can see, once that is done and the preview of the canvas loads, we will have a capitalized or a headline name and a subheadline email. So with that, we just want to then make sure that we also have a title, which is always nice to have. So we will do a navigation title, and we will simply name it contacts. So then with that, we've created a very basic UI layout. And finally, we can now move on to the search bar. This is very simple and only actually takes one line of code. So underneath the navigation title, we will do the modifier of searchable, and we will have a text. And that text is essentially the binding to the search term, which is what will show what the user types. So we do $ for binding, search term, and we have a prompt of search contacts, indicating or instructing the user of what to do when searching, as you can see there in the preview now. However, you may notice that the search bar is at the bottom, whereas typically in most apps the search bar is at the top. So to fix that, just before the prompt we need to pass in another argument, that being a placement. So if we type in placement, and then when we need to do a modifier within that of navigation bar drawer, and you can see we have display mode, and then we will do a modifier within display mode of always. And once the canvas reloads and we've put a comma just before the prompt, we should see the search bar go to the top. There we are. We use always because if we scroll up and down, the search bar will always appear, giving the user the ability to always search context. So then if we go into context, and I should warn you, if you're in the preview, it can take a while, and then we type in Alan, we get Alan, we type in Bob, we get Bob, we type in Charlie, we get Charlie. Then if we also try to type in Gmail, we will only get Bob and Alan, not Charlie. Then obviously if we type in email, we will only get Charlie. And just to make sure our search is working, we will type in mail and we will get Alan, Bob and Charlie. Nice. So there you have it. We've created a search bar through 6 steps. 1 being to create a struct, 2 to create an array to go through the struct, a @state to track what the user is doing, a filtered array to guard if the search is empty and return an array of contact when searched, displaying it in the UI, and then calling with a search modifier. If you followed along, well done. We've done a really nice job with that, and a really basic search bar that you can use as a template in future projects. Hopefully a bit more complex than this and a bit more challenging. If you've enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and bye. See you in the next one.